Thank you very much for joining me on the Voice of Job Seekers video series. I should say summer series. Eventually we'll make it live, but I just want to be sure that you know that we're not live. This is a recording. My name is Mark Anthony Dyson. You want to know about me and what I do, you can go to thevoiceofjobseekers.com. Today I have Jennifer Tardy with me from, I believe it's jennifertardy.com. Is that correct?
That's right.
Good, yeah, good deal. How are you?
I can't complain. Today's a good day.
Yes, absolutely. Every day's a good day, they say.
Today's a good day for a good day. That's what one of my best friends says.
Ah, good deal. Jennifer is a career coach and works in the career space. Also, former recruiter. Is that correct?
Yeah, some of the work that I do today actually split my time in half, where I do career coaching for job seekers, but I currently also train recruiters. So employers that want to implement diversity recruiting programs, I help them to do that. So I can't get away from my roots of recruiting.
Ah, yeah. Well, you do what you got to do, right? But
That's
I'm
right.
glad that you're with us today because your perspective is really important because you really get the feeling about diversity recruiting when it comes to clients. I imagine you have a perspective if and when you're pitching diversity recruiting, why the company may need diversity recruiting. And of course, working with clients of all different backgrounds, that also gives you a different perspective. So there's kind of 360. You kind of know what the employer is thinking, and you kind of know what the job seeker is thinking on both ends.
Exactly. And one of the benefits, so it's not enough for me to just know that information about what employers are thinking, what job seekers are thinking. My main responsibility is to translate that information to the other, right?
Hmm.
All with the ultimate goal of making it easy, easy, easy for job seekers and recruiters that are looking for them to meet each other to have career success. So, yep, that's exactly what I'm over here trying to do.
Good deal. I believe context is everything. I think this is important because it's always been a premise in what I've experienced in consulting with clients over the years that Black professionals and people of color have different challenges on the onset. Um, it- Even once they press the apply button or once they send through a resume, their challenges are unique. Would you agree?
Absolutely. Yeah. One of the biggest challenges and one of the biggest differences as it relates to being in your job search while Black is the whole conversation around what's a distraction and what's not a distraction.
Hmm.
So people are always asking me, should I should I show on my resume my race or ethnicity, or or my orientation or anything like that? Should I show that on my resume? Should I announce it when I'm there in an interview and things like that? And I always talk about it in terms of it's not what you should or should not do, but it's really about thinking about what can be distracting. Anything that distracts the hiring manager away from your knowledge, your skills, and your abilities should be limited, right? The only
Hmm.
things that you should add to your resume, to your narrative when you're interviewing, are things that make you more value added to the job. So, an example of a distraction could be today, I have on orange earrings. I love wearing orange earrings. I love wearing bright colored earrings. If I go into an interview, you won't see that. It can be distracting, but it's it's hard because it's a piece of who I am, enjoying wearing bright colors. But I don't want the interviewer thinking about my earrings. I want them thinking about the experience that I'm bringing to the table. So it's all about minimizing those distractions, and not everyone has to do that.
Right. And, you know, in used to interview many, many years ago. I guess it's been now. Um, the point to where, the black, the blue, the gray suit and you want to be conservative and I've worked with conservative companies. I um, it was important, but my ties weren't all that conservative. and neither were my socks, but I had to be me. And in case for people out there who listen to me for quite some time, every now and then on Instagram, I kind of flaunt my sock collection, which is about 125 pair of just dress socks. I have a lot more than that,
That's
but
awesome.
I love fashionable socks. I've always had, and I passed it on to my sons who also love fashionable socks. But that would I digress. But I think the point being is that the one of the challenges that we have is how much of a can we bring of ourselves to work, and that is truly a thing if you're Black, because our culture is kind of it is part of the culture. It's often made as part of the culture, but yet at the same time, we are often the anti-culture.
Right. So, to your point, in addition to how much of ourselves can we bring to the job, we have to ask ourselves the question: how much of myself can I bring to this interview? How much of myself can I bring to my
Hmm.
resume? How much of myself can I bring to this networking opportunity right here? Because,
Hmm.
especially if the employers that we're interviewing and networking with and submitting our resume to, especially if they're very homogenous groups. And so let's say,
Yes.
I meet a lot of employers now where their employee base is 90% white men and women, right? And
Hmm.
so if they're homogenous from that respect, how much of myself can I bring to you without you getting distracted in my differences as opposed to thinking about my experience and my knowledge?
Hmm. Right. I think you know, you started with the tools that you have, and they'll need to employers will need to make an immediate decision before accepting you into the fold, or at least to engage you. Because, for instance, you know, hair is a big thing.
Mhm.
African American women hair is a thing.
That's right.
The You know, it was just a few years ago that the state of Texas had said it was okay for employers to discriminate if women had hair that was, or not
Natural.
just women, men too, if they did not have the traditional haircut. Um, so that is really a thing. There are other states that do it, but there are other employers who do it, who just don't talk about it and don't make it a thing.
And this is where I challenge employers as well too, about what is and what isn't acceptable to do,
Hmm.
to say, to behave. I always ask the question: by whose standards? By whose standards are we looking at? Right.
Hmm.
So,
Right.
even thinking about hair, it may not be acceptable. You as an employer may say that it's not acceptable for men to have, beards, but by whose standards? Is it because historically your executive leadership team, they've been all white men who are cleanly shaven, and they don't have to think about or concern themselves with razor bumps or ingrown hair? But it's
Hmm.
very different if you're a black man, completely who shaving or trying to be cleanly shaven. You may have to deal with ingrown hair, or razor bumps or something like that on your face. So I'm always pushing the boundaries and asking those tough questions. By whose standards is this acceptable versus not acceptable?
Right. So in your practice, I've got to hear how you, when you're approached with, it may be unintended with microaggressions
Yeah,
and micro insults, and I'm sure it happens. It happens still, even when companies approach you. I wonder if they're intended to ask the question as well, or just to feel you out and see how you'll respond.
yeah. So here's what's interesting. I always do my best to meet people where they are. There's no
Hmm.
judgment when people come to talk to me. I do my best to assume positive intent. So if
Hmm.
someone asks me a question and maybe they ask it in a way that most would deem offensive, okay,
Hmm.
I'm proud that you were able to ask that question. And so by assuming positive intent, it allows me to put the emotion to the side, and instead of thinking about calling a person out, I'll call them in. And I talk
Mhm.
a lot about that. Like, how do you call a person in versus calling a person out? And a part of calling a person in is asking them more questions. So,
Mhm.
oh, well, I thought I heard you say da da da. What did you mean by that? And so
Mhm.
sometimes just in them being able to explain what they meant by something, now we can have a better conversation. And so it's
Right.
not my job is to help organizations to increase diversity within their candidate pools and ultimately in those that they hire into the organization. A part of
Mhm.
doing that, we have to have the uncomfortable conversations, and I have to bring things to the table for employers all the time. It's my responsibility, but I can do that in a way that still creates a safe environment ultimately. So I don't pay as much. I hear it. I always I hear the things that are being said, but I don't let it distract me from getting to the goal. And it's more of a confirmation, like, oh yeah, I'm glad you're here. I'm glad
Right.
you're here trying to get some diversity recruiting advice because I can understand what the issue is already.
Yeah. And it's interesting that most of us power through those conversations, just as you talked about, that we're willing to go past it. But ultimately, um, somebody who daily deals with it, and not in your position, but ultimately they're in a position where they are not particularly high on the totem pole, and they
Yeah.
hear those things daily, and sometimes they hear two, three, four, 10, 100 times a day. But at some point, there are people, Black people, who it becomes a point to where something has to be said at a particular time.
That's right.
And you probably had that experience as well. I've had it
Mhm.
to where you gotta say, just as a case in point, by you saying what you just said, it's not appropriate, and here's why.
Yeah. So, um, so what I'll do, and I have had those scenarios before.
Yeah.
I think the first thing that I think about is in an everyday scenario. Let's say outside of my job. Let's say I'm working in corporate America, and I'm
Hmm.
not a business owner on this end.
Uh-huh.
And someone came to me, and it was some level of microaggression or something. I still will ask more questions, right? Well, what did you mean by that?
Right.
And then I would invite them to think about it differently. So I am personally not that person that is necessarily like, you shouldn't have said that, that was inappropriate, all this other stuff. I'm more of the person that's like, here's what just happened, here's how it impacted me. And I invite you to think about this a little bit differently. You don't have to, but I invite you to, because you may run into the next person, and then it's a
Mhm.
major issue there. And
Yeah.
so, I just that's kind of how I've approached it in the past.
Yeah. And honestly, most of us do, right? Most of us are interested in building a bridge. We're not
Yeah,
looking to tear down the bridge.
yeah,
And I don't want to give that impression at all. There are times when colleagues will say things. Um, And for me, at this particular point, it's not very often. It's not as often as I
mhm,
used to go into the workplace every day.
yeah,
I have a very unique position where I can either talk to somebody, I can talk to a whole bunch of people in 1 year, and there'll be times when I decide I don't talk to anybody. Right now, I don't I don't have clients. I don't take clients right now. I've turned down a number of clients, and I have that little hole where they go. I talk to a lot of career coaches, and I talk to a lot of businesses for my writing client. So for me, it's a lot different, and I get to the point to where they either already do business with me or not, because of my mostly these days, because of my LinkedIn presence or my social media presence. They see my
yeah,
face. They see my character. They can look at the videos, they can hear the podcast. So they have, when I'm approached, they have a good sense of who I am, and I think that's where the bridge is for job seekers who are Black. That these days they can kind of they can kind of diffuse the bomb before it goes off. By having a social media presence, by making themselves more visible and making themselves to where people can decide and get all the, all those barriers out the way before they even contact it.
Yeah, I would agree. I think the hard part, or one of the biggest challenges, if you're a job seeker and you don't know a lot about what to expect, is it's almost like, how can you win the game without really knowing the rules? So
Hmm.
I'm always so proud of people who are on their job search that do connect themselves to coaches.
Hmm.
Whether it's me or anybody else, as long as you're connecting yourself to a coach that understands what they may be up against, and helps people in advance to know how to
Hmm.
navigate. And I always talk about navigating the bias that's baked into the hiring process.
Hmm.
Because we all have to remember, and I share this with some of my employers as well too, that the hiring system, as it was originally created, back in our history, it was meant to exclude people who
Hmm.
weren't white men, or more
Right.
specifically, Christian, heterosexual white men. So it was meant to
Hmm.
exclude anyone who was different from that. And so now, even though organizations have done a good job of moving the needle and removing some of the bias, there's still a lot of bias that's still there. And the system is doing exactly what it was originally created to do. We just have to, specifically as recruiters, we have to stop thinking about, what additional places can I go to find people, but we have to also think about, what do I need to stop doing as well too, that's creating an obstacle course. And what job seekers have to think about is, what are those landmines? What does this obstacle course look like? And they need to connect themselves to someone who can easily help them to navigate it. Whether you're trying to get into a company for the first time, or whether you're in a company and you're trying to get a promotion. I actually think that the obstacle course is even more complex when you're in an
Hmm.
organization trying to get a promotion, especially if you're trying to get into leadership for the first time.
Yeah, and I liked the word landmine, because in essence, that's what it is. Sometimes you don't know if the next step is going to,
Right.
blow up your foot.
Deadbeat.
In
Deadbeat.
essence, and that's true. It's something. Sometimes it is the great unknown, but in speaking of that, uh, referrals come in handy. Um, referrals do come in handy. They come in more handy when you've got people who are already on the inside, because there are studies that actually show that the referrals, you know, uh, in a homogenous company are going to remain homogenous because they've been recruiting and referring people like them. Is
Yep, who identify
yeah, it's the similar to me bias in
right?
a sense. And then when they get there, they talk about things that are actually more common ground than they actually are to exclude you. Many times, not all the time, but there's many times when there comes to a difference, and somebody black who goes into a homogenous company, and most of the time it's a black person going into a white company, that they're already, the scrutiny and the process also becomes different for them.
That's right. That's right. And to your point about referral programs, and I share this with employers too, referral programs can be dangerous if they go unmonitored. Because, and I see the good deeds that's happening. It's like,
Hmm.
okay, if you're a high performing employee, odds are you're hanging around some other high performing folks. And odds are, if they know that you like where you work and you tell them about it, they're going to bring their high performing selves over to the same organization that you're working in. But if you're not thinking about diversity within the whole context of your referral program, you're going to refer and hire more of the same. And it's no different than, I call them feeder programs too. So
Hmm.
organizations have a lot of feeder programs like internships or co-ops, or or apprenticeships. And if you're not closely paying attention to, are these programs, the people that we're hiring into those temporary programs, if there's
Hmm.
not diversity there, but these are the first groups that you go to hire full time into your company, then you have feeder programs that are also, going against your diversity recruiting initiatives.
Yeah, and um, it's a double-edged sword. Referrals are good, but when you're trying to achieve diversity, everybody keep recruiting the same type of people, then
Yeah,
how will how will you change the organization?
that's right.
Um, a suggestion that often comes out of those conversations are, well, maybe you should start rewarding diversity
Yep.
amongst your employees. Maybe there might be a chance for you to give an incentive to your white employees to refer people who are black, or at least point uh, to a diverse resource. I mean, recruiters that struggle with this, they should start getting tickets to HBCU career fairs. Where they'll find a large amount of candidates for them and for their company. Be there, participate with them locally. There's a lot of solutions to it, but many times because they're stepping into the great unknown like we do, the advantage is that they have the power. They still retain the power in that sense if they're trying to achieve a diversity goal.
Yeah, and so I absolutely completely agree that if an organization is working to increase diversity, that partnering with historically Black colleges and universities is very important. I also say, or I add to that,
Hmm.
is don't discount predominantly white institutions, or as I call them, historically white institutions,
Right,
right?
right.
Because you'll oftentimes find that, so you may have a PWI or predominantly white institution that has, I don't know, 50,000 students, and even if 10% of them are Black, it may be higher than some of the HBCUs that you're going to. So there's still a high population at some of the PWIs, but you have to be very intentional about where you go within that university to find them as well too.
Yeah. One of the things I had a discussion once along those very lines, and one of the interesting things that came out, and I completely agree with you that you shouldn't. There are black students everywhere. Um, what becomes for a lot of them is that some of them do get a little discouraged because they go to career fairs, especially recent years, I'd say the last 5 or 6 years. uh, They get tired of going to career fairs because they're exhausted from uh, you know because of being seen a little different, being seen like they're being rushed on, being seen like they're not able to have a longer conversation than David before them. David had a half hour with them. They were able to only get 5 minutes, and they were asked for their resume to move on. And sometimes it might be that um, discriminating factor of, so okay, his hair, her name, his demeanor, um, you know, makes them more or less a passive candidate than they are an actual. When they're trying to have the same kind of conversation, they want to have that same rapport. Um, and that becomes a little hard. But uh, of course, it varies, and we're not saying that this is just the one particular scenario, but it happens.
It does, and it is so hard to decipher or discern if
Hmm.
this is actually what's happening to me right now,
Hmm.
because and I tell my clients often that I don't want them to exhaust their mental energy in trying to figure out did this happen? Meaning, did they move me along very quickly because they're uncomfortable with Black people, or did they move me on really quickly because they're just exhausted because it's the end of the day, or did they move
Hmm.
me along quickly because I didn't show up well, right?
Right.
It could be any of those factors, but instead of me and my clients talking about that and trying to figure out what actually happened, we spend
Hmm.
more time talking about here's what you can do to make sure that you get more time when you're at a career fair, when you're talking to an employer. Don't wait to the end of the career fair. Be one of the first people that shows up at the career fair when they're not exhausted, when they're excited to get started.
Hmm.
Consider asking them some questions as well too. Consider, that there are only, even if that career fair has 50 employers who are there, think about the top 7 that you want to go to, and then when you get to the career fair, tell them that there were only 7 employers that you wanted to talk to. So you did your research, and now we're having a conversation. So I try to give them tools to keep the engagement going, to keep the dialogue moving forward when they're there at a career fair. So regardless of it just makes their chances a little bit better.
Sure. And for them to do the research before that night, maybe sometimes, in some cases, the way that social media is, companies will announce where they're going to be that day,
That's
and
right.
why not start to follow them and put a note, put a comment, and say, hey, I'm looking forward to see you. Blah blah blah, and see if sometimes you can even get a name or two so you can research the person that's going to be there, and maybe even make it some kind of, even if it's a familiar connection by name, at least you can also take an advantage, and that person will forward to meeting you, and then when you meet them, there's that engagement, and people actually are, you kind of lift the veil of the unknown, uh,
Mhm.
if and when you can do that. So that's so true, and it's a very, we have so many tools that are in the disposal that we don't bother to use, um,
Right.
because we're afraid of over you mostly to offend or overstep our bounds. Well, really, you don't when you do it in a very tactful and respectful way.
No, I completely agree with that. I think that people can do most things. It's all about how you do it.
Right, right. So finally, just to say and just to touch on a little bit about the interview process, I think it's really important for job seekers, Black professionals, uh, that the homework is definitely done before they get there, and continue to build that bridge even if you meet somebody at the career fair, because sometimes and many times they can provide intel that is really useful for you to know before you go into the room.
Yeah, it sure can. Um, so whenever I'm talking to my clients about how to prep for an upcoming interview,
Hmm.
one of the first things that we talk about is, do you know the logistics of running an interview? Like, do
Hmm.
you know how long your interview is supposed to last? Do you know if it's going to be a phone call or a video interview? Before the pandemic, I would say an in-person interview. Do you know how many people are going to interview? What type of interview is it going to be? How long? What titles? So the more information that you have, that you're equipped with, the better prepared you can be. Because the worst thing that can happen is that you walk into an interview and you're surprised. You're thinking it's going to be a 30-minute interview with one person, and then you get there and it's a 1 hour interview with 5 people at the same time, right? You can't even prepare mentally for something like that. And the
Right.
better prepared you are, the better you can show up at that interview yourself. Yeah, so getting the logistics is a major piece of it. But another piece of it too is, and I say this is among several tips to prepare, but this is a big one that a lot of people overlook. You have to get to a space of being able to calm your nerves.
Hmm.
And a part of the reason why you're so nervous when you go into an interview is because somewhere along the line someone has taught you that an interview is only a one-way street, that you are in the hot seat and the employer is asking you questions and you're responsible for answering it no matter what. But I share with people that when you go into an interview, it's a two-way discussion. You need
Hmm.
to make sure that this is the type of organization that you want to work at. And in order to find that out, you have to also ask questions too. And and so understanding that, number one, you deserve to be at the interview, you're qualified to be there. Number two, you're also assessing them just as much as they're assessing you. Just
Right.
understanding those two things will help to calm your nerves, and
Hmm.
the calmer you are, the better you're able to become present, to really hear the questions being asked of you, and to have confidence that you'll be able to recall whatever answer or whatever story or whatever scenario you need to say in response to their question. And then in
Hmm.
the end, you'll be more competitive.
Yes, I completely agree. I've given that advice before, and
Awesome.
the difference, um, being willing to prepare for a conversation rather than an interrogation.
That's
Uh,
right.
that's one that's one image that often comes to mind. But even more so, asking questions so that they understand that you're also making a decision,
Mhm.
because it costs them time that should you find out that's not going to be the right fit for you,
That's right.
and you should be able to use the same scrutiny, you and stop coming in thinking that you're at a disadvantage because you need the job. And I think there's a mindset there, there's a desperation mindset, or that you either hate doing it or you've done it so many times that you're tired of doing it.
Yeah.
uh, you're asking questions to where they understand completely that at the end of the meeting that you will either walk into that door, or that you walk out that door not to be seen, or that you're also going to follow up and see what the next steps are, and that there is some possibility. But it's always you're always building bridges when you're interviewing. You're not always looking to do a one-off, because it's a process now. It's no longer, you can interview once and then you're hired. That rarely happens these days.
I would completely agree with you. And if you are in a situation where it's a one and done, they talk to you for 15 minutes and then they extend you an offer, I would be a little concerned about that. Those would be the
Yes, I
interviews. So
would.
I'd be like,
Yes.
why are
Yeah.
they trying to bring, what are you going to do with me when I get in there?
Right, right, exactly.
Mhm.
Yeah, and there are companies that do that because they too don't like the interview process.
Correct.
And you get the interviewers that haven't been trained or haven't done it as much as they could have, and it's possible that somebody have had tons of interviews with people, but has always done it wrong.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you get
Yeah.
those,
That's
but
true.
so you've got to be a step ahead by being more prepared than they are, or assume that you're preparing more than they have.
Sure. Very, very, very true. Stay a
Yes,
step ahead.
absolutely. So, thank you very much, Jennifer, joining me here today. And hopefully, at large, that there'll be more discussions, and there have been some, and there have been some great discussions on, interviewing and job searching while Black. See, it wasn't as bad as people thought it was. They thought it would, that we were going to have our fists and our afros and our afro picks, and,
Right.
reminiscent of the Black Panther movement.
Right.
It's not like that at all.
And you're absolutely right. It's not that intense. There are a lot of things that there are a lot of nuggets that I'm hopeful that people are able to get out of this conversation. And
Mhm.
I also appreciate you too for thinking of me to have this conversation. I don't take that lightly, so I appreciate you.
Well, thank you. So if people want to get a hold of you and find out more about you, where should they go? How do they find you?
Yeah, I keep everything on my website, which is jennifertardy.com. Jennifer Tardy, tardy as in late. My dad used to always say, we may be tardy, but we're never late. So
Right,
jennifertardy.com. They can find me
right.
there.
Great. Well, thank the rest of you, and we will see you next time very soon with more interviews and more conversations we'll have online. Thanks for joining me.